Hello everyone, welcome back to D Squared Stories, an audio fiction podcast bringing you short, serialized weekly stories. We launch into this week with a new story called Canaveral Academy for Challenged Youth. This is going to be a 6-part series. It takes place in Canaveral Academy, a draconian, so-called Christian boarding school for delinquents. The students are routinely subjected to severe and unfair punishments, and then one day, a grisly crime shakes the entire school to its core. Minor content warning. This story references and has the plot centered around some pretty serious physical and psychological abuse of children. As always, my aim is never to write anything for shock value, and I believe everything herein contributes to the overall story. However, I completely understand if this is one you want to skip. After this story, we'll be on to something much lighter. With that, I hope you enjoy. If you do, give a like, rating, follow, or tell a friend. Otherwise, let's hop into Chapter 1 of Canaveral Academy for Challenged Youth. Chapter 1. Arrival Day. In the library of Canaveral Academy for Challenged Youth, the complete silence of night was broken only by the sounds of owls in the distance. The entire central Pennsylvania campus was under curfew starting just a few hours ago. The ancient growth trees and several smaller, thinner trees that engulfed the entire location would have made one wonder if this had truly been a prominent male boarding school just a little under a decade ago. The solemn library had its stillness broken as a draft fluttered the pages of books left out on the table, and an older boy, around the age of 17, entered. He stood on his toes as he carefully entered the building, keeping his head on a swivel, borderline imitating the owls outside. When he was content that he went unspotted, he went over to a utility closet. He attempted to turn the knob, but it was locked. He let out a sigh of relief. He then knocked on the door. 2 hard, long knocks, followed by 3 quick, light ones. The knob rattled, unlocking from the inside, and then cracked open just a bit. A girl, around his age, peered her head out and smiled. "Hey, you made it," she said softly. "And you're sure you weren't followed?" "Of course not," he said. "I can't believe after so long we're finally making this happen." He beamed with excitement as he looked at the girl across from him. Both wore these gray and drab school uniforms, seeming almost closer to a prisoner's jumpsuit. She blushed and twiddled her fingers a bit, seeming suddenly nervous. "Gosh, it's so crazy. I'm worried we might get caught." The boy shook his head. "There's no chance. They don't even know I swiped the key from them yet. They haven't changed the lock. This is old Johnny's key I gave you, and he's on night rounds tonight. If he comes by and tries to use the key, then we can run away when he goes to get someone who has it. It's the perfect crime." She smiled gently, but then another draft kicked up, and it seemed the vortex of wind knocked the smile off her face as she saw another boy their age in the doorway. "I knew it," he said. The boy who entered was short and scrawny. He had dark black hair and a kind of bowl cut that laid flat along his forehead. He had a handful of freckles and deathly pale skin. He smirked a bit as he walked in on them, revealing crooked teeth, one prominent one on the top row near the front of his mouth missing. He crossed his arms, wearing the same uniform as the two of them, but he had a silver sash right down the diagonal of his chest. "You mind telling your dorm officer just what you're doing, Francis?" he asked. Francis looked at him and scowled. The girl cowered, looking absolutely frightened. "Well, Judah," Francis said, "if you must know, Rachel and I were cleaning this dirty library. Now, if our dorm officer would be so kind as to just pretend nothing was found here, that would make it a lot easier to do our cleaning." Judah shook his head. "Yeah, I'm not an idiot, Francis. That's obviously not what you're doing." Francis groaned. "For the love of God, dude, you can call me Frankie. Everyone does. I'm not calling you an idiot. I'm just asking that for once you stop being the world's biggest teacher's pet." "Nicknames are for pets. At the academy, we use our Christian names. We also do not take the name of God in vain. I guess that's just one more thing I'll need to put in my write-up." He pulled out a pencil and began to write something on a notepad he carried with him. Francis's face contorted into pure rage, but just as it reached its height, it went blank. He looked completely expressionless, and then the next moment, he chuckled a little. Rachel looked on behind him in horror, knowing something before Judah did. She grabbed at Francis's pant leg. "No, please, Frankie," she said. "Don't do it. It's not worth it." "No, it really is," he said. "I'm already on probation. If I'm going back to the cage, I might as well make it worth every minute." Judah looked up from his notepad momentarily, still not putting together what he was saying. Then, within an instant, Francis closed the distance between the two and sucker punched him right in the eyes. The impact bent Judah's glasses out of shape and shattered one of the frames. Judah went falling backwards. He scrambled, but Francis put his foot right on his chest and looked down at him. "You're a lousy traitor, Judah," he said. "You think just because you brown-nose all of the teachers and the head bastard Peter that you'll get some great reward at the end of this. Why can't you be more like Mary? Why do you have to ruin everything for us?" He pressed his foot harder down on Judah, and Judah yelped in pain. Rachel behind them looked on in horror. Francis briefly looked back before shaking his head at her. He was done with the pity for Judah, with the restraint he had to have on his anger. He was ready to do the exact thing that got him sent here in the first place. When suddenly, he was struck upside the head with a cane. He fell backwards as what Rachel had been rendered speechless from stepped from beyond the shadows. A man around 60 stepped out. His hair was long and gray, a bald spot in the middle. He had a wrinkled face and nose. He had a grimace plastered to his face, with one gold tooth in place of a missing one. He stepped forward again towards Francis. "Master Francis," he said, "it's bad enough to break curfew, to attempt to fornicate with this young woman and defile her. Wretched enough as it is, but now you attempt to slay your own fellow student? What might have you to say in your defense to your headmaster?" Francis rose back to his feet. His anger had hardly subsided. He pulled something from his sock. It was a rock, sharpened over the course of weeks. Headmaster Peter's eyes widened, not with shock, but with a fiery rage that surpassed Francis's. As Francis lunged towards him with it, he quickly struck again before he could even get close. He nearly knocked the boy out cold, but that did nothing to stop him from striking him on the head again. He struck his left leg, his right, his left arm, and right, then struck several times into the boy's back as he cried out. "Frankie!" Rachel called out. He pointed his cane at her, almost unable to speak from how consumed with wrath he was. Peter's right leg, withered and supported by a brace, made a sound that caused a twinge of pain to mix into his enraged expression. Judah rose to his feet. He was frightened, to the point of not even enjoying the scene that his greatest tormentor was enduring. He just watched on in silence. Eventually, Peter managed to force the words from his throat. "Silence, wretched girl," he said. "Pray for forgiveness from God, and I will decide how much that softens the blows you will receive. Pray for forgiveness, and give prayers of thanks that Judah told me of your planned transgressions, so that I had time to save your virgin soul." He turned his attention back to Francis and continued to wail on the boy with all of his might, heaving with each swing. Despite the severity of each strike, he seemed to do it with a consistency unfitting of a man of his age and condition. After some time, the owls who had been quietly watching on left the nearby area, as if they themselves were disturbed by the scene below. The next morning, the sun slowly woke up the entire Canaveral campus. No matter the season, it took longer than normal for the light to pierce the veil of the trees in the valley. For this reason, the morning assembly every morning at 6:30 could be quite difficult for the students, with only the faint natural light helping them as the morning bell system called them to alertness. One attendant from the faculty attended to each of the dorms. Mr. Phillip attended to the boys' dorm. Miss Jamie handled the girls' dorm. The gentleman had a tougher job in his quarter. The unruly and rarely respectful boys were less than orderly and prompt, as they often groaned about the early start and would even occasionally get violent. Today was a particularly rough day in the boys' dorm, as many of them were awake and questioning Judah when he returned with old Johnny late in the night without Francis. The elderly man could do little to calm them down that night, and proceeded to just call it quits and return to his rounds. Judah in particular was slow to get up, and slacked in his officer duties of rallying his fellow classmates. Mr. Phillip, having been briefed on the night's events, gave him a bit more leeway than the others. The girls' dorm, on the other hand, was a well-oiled machine. Mary had awoken using a makeshift timing device she had fashioned the year prior. The young Indian student officer, with brown hair and a perfectly neat bun, gathered her dorm mates and lined them up and did her own inspections on their uniforms before their attendant could even arrive. Miss Jamie entered the room and scanned each of the girls up and down, nearly spending a whole minute thoroughly examining them for any dress code or grooming violations. Mary eyed the attendant carefully, as she failed to find any defects that Mary had not already fixed. She almost made it to the very end, when she grabbed the second-to-last girl in line by her hair and in front of the others. "Rebecca, your outfit is dusty. Wipe yourself off," Miss Jamie said. The tall woman pushed the girl towards the bed and tossed a rag from the floor over to her. She turned her wicked expression towards Mary as she smirked at her. Mary had to do her best to keep her eye from twitching. She could not wrap her head around how this was possible. She did uniform inspections last night, so it had missed her attention this morning. It was not technically a uniform violation, but Miss Jamie had her discretion to correct any defects within reason. Mary racked her brain until she looked knowingly as Miss Jamie inspected Rachel's uniform. Rachel's uniform was less worn than usual, which was odd for an outgoing senior, as they rarely got new uniforms. However, the second-year Rebecca, of the same size, would have had a more preserved uniform that should not have been dusty. On second look at Rebecca, Miss Jamie had actually missed a tear in the gray jumper, one that Rebecca had quite deftly hid. Mary nodded to Rebecca, who quickly hid it again after cleaning off the dust. Miss Jamie studied Rachel carefully. She had a bruise across her cheek and one on her ear. Headmaster Peter had winded himself on Francis and left him no energy for Rachel. Plus, he was always softer on the girls. That is what Miss Jamie thought to herself as she scanned Rachel, looking for any rationale to give her the harsher punishment she felt she deserved. However, Rebecca's quick thinking and compassion had thwarted her. After a while, the attendant turned back to Mary, who had been staring at the dusty rag and clenching her fist. Miss Jamie smiled and called the inspection to a close as she led the girls out of the dorm. Once finally behind her, Mary could breathe a sigh of relief and smile a little. She had to pretend to feel flustered and be agitated by the minor discretion, the blemish on her record, just to make Miss Jamie feel like she had won something. Otherwise, she knew that her watchful eyes would be able to find the tear in the jumper, and maybe even piece together the uniform swap, which was technically also a violation. Mary would sew the jumper herself back together later. Rebecca, despite her age, had shaped up to be a model student and team player, and would be able to hide it for the rest of the day. Miss Jamie and Mr. Phillip met in the square and assembled the students as Headmaster Peter emerged in front of the large crucifix in the center of the campus, between the two dorms. Mr. Phillip could not be bothered to do the thorough inspections that Miss Jamie did, and looked only for flagrant violations that would in turn get himself yelled at for not noticing. He simply stared out the window to wait for Miss Jamie to emerge so that he might bring the boys out at the same time, as to give the illusion that he was being as detail-oriented as she was. Headmaster Peter led the group in prayer. "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name," he said. He paused for emphasis, as he often tended to do where it was not necessary. He stared out at the students. The boys seemed to be looking up with fear and sadness in their eyes, with the exception of Judah, who just seemed to struggle to stay awake. The girls all looked towards the podium, in the front of the crucifix, below or down on it, though they were careful as to not look too far away as to warrant a scolding or other punishment. "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses." As he said this, he gestured back behind the crucifix, to the sight that broke the boys' spirits and made the girls avert their eyes. Francis lay in a small cage behind the large cross. He was still bloodied, terribly bruised, and unable to even rise due to the blows to his legs. He twitched slightly as the loud booming voice of the headmaster rang out, though it was impossible to tell if he was reacting to it or if it was just the involuntary spasms of a highly beaten body. Miniature Purgatory was the official name of the punishment chamber installed in the center of the campus, but all the students just called it the cage. It was one of the oldest installments as a part of the new campus ownership, even predating the crucifix. In the original design, Headmaster Peter lobbied greatly for his partners to make it a cross to which the students would be bound. The other founding members only narrowly talked him out of it, after pivoting from saying it was too inhumane to that it was too sacrilegious. So instead, they had the cage, the worst form of punishment students at Canaveral Academy could receive, usually predated by some kind of severe beating or some other means of intense humiliation. "And may we forgive those who trespass against us, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen." He shuffled his papers up at the podium and moved his reading glasses from his pocket up to his face. He proceeded to give announcements as if this was just an ordinary school assembly. Young ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another year at Canaveral Academy. For many of you, this marks the third or maybe even fourth year here. You must feel quite excited as your 18th birthday looms closer, and you will have the opportunity to graduate from these hallowed halls. He looked over them, seeming cheery, as if addressing an audience with a far different energy than the one he faced. He went back to find his place in the script. I look forward to returning you to the world as fully formed individuals, free of the flaws and faults that brought you here. This has always been the goal of Canaveral Academy, to send you off like ships into the heavens. But much like a spacecraft, you must be engineered properly. A single defect in any part of you, and you will burst into hellfire on your ascent. The headmaster watched as Judah stumbled a little. Mary, who headed up her class next to him, elbowed him to make him more alert. The headmaster paid this little mind as he continued speaking. As you know, today is Arrival Day. The newest class, comprised of several ages, will be joining us later this morning, he said. As always, they will not be accustomed to how we do things here. Please assist your faculty and class officers in keeping them in line. We ask you do this not for our sake, but for their sake. We will not be lenient with newcomers any more so than we are with you, but we will make it worth everyone's while if this is a smooth transition. Mary nodded, before the upperclassmen followed suit, and the underclassmen, taking their cues from the ones here longer, also nodded. In years past, they were rewarded with better food, longer sleeping hours, and more relaxed punishments when a class of new arrivals quickly integrated. Conversely, things got a lot more miserable when they were not quick to adjust. The headmaster checked his watch. There was little time for any more announcements due to Miss Jamie's thorough inspections. He simply tapped it and looked up at them. Class 1A, please now proceed to your first period, he said before pausing. Class 1B, please proceed to your next period. All except Master Judah. Please, come up here with me. The two classes went in their separate directions. In the sea of people, someone kicked Judah in the back of his leg, making him trip and drop his books to the ground. The headmaster and the two attendants had failed to see who had done it, and simply dismissed it, showing no compassion for the boy. Mary was already leading Class 1A to their destination before she sighed and walked over towards him. She picked up his books for him and helped him to his feet. She pulled a handkerchief, a part of her uniform, and wiped his face with it gently. She patted him gently on the shoulder and smiled at him. He could not help but smile back at her. Judah and the headmaster walked in through a several-story building. Throughout the room, there were various pieces of exercise equipment. The headmaster led Judah over to the dumbbells. He set his cane down and grabbed two 20-pound ones and thrust them towards him. I am tired of having a student officer who is constantly pushed around for being too weak, he said to him. Strengthen yourself. Become as strong of body as you are of mind, Master Judah. Judah took the two dumbbells from him, but his arms sank as he held them. He struggled to lift them above his waist, let alone curl them. His lip quivered, and he looked at Peter with desperation, before saying, Headmaster, I am unable to lift these. Can we start with something lighter? Peter seemed to scowl at the student, an involuntary grunt of disapproval coming from his throat. He took the weights back into his own hands, and curled them one after another handily. His muscles flexed underneath his slightly wrinkled skin as he worked his biceps. Unimaginable, he said. A young man of your age should have no issue with something like this. No wonder you lack confidence. Pick up the 15s, then. Judah did as he said, and picked up the 15-pound dumbbells. He and the headmaster turned then to face the mirror, as both of them did bicep curls. Despite the weight decrease, Judah still continued to struggle, heaving with each lift. Peter continued, exhaling as he lifted and inhaling as he brought it back down, moving like a machine, with perfect form. He looked at Judah in the mirror. It is not enough to be morally good, to follow the teachings of Christ. One must be strong enough to punish those who do not. Judah heaved. I understand, sir. I get that's why you and the other staff work out and stay in shape as you do. But why must I? I am under a year from departing here. In the real world, violence is not permissible. Punishing the bad is left to the police. Peter almost growled as his lip curled with frustration. He shook his head, still making eye contact with the mirrored Judah. "How are you my best student and still so naive?" he asked. "What if all men of my generation, at your age, thought as you did? We would have never swept the beaches of Normandy. We would have never pushed back the Germans from conquering this entire world with their godless Nazi ideology." Peter increased the pace of his curling, all the while seeming to work himself more and more into a frenzy. "That is how the society of this time thinks. Godless hippies who spent the past decade protesting Vietnam, enabling our communist enemies. They reject the Lord and all of his abundant gifts in favor of drugs and debauchery. Morality is not relative, young Judah. We cannot afford to simply stand by and let others do as they please. It is our imperative to try and save their souls, be stewards of God's earth, keep it in a state worthy of his second coming." The headmaster set the dumbbells back down. Judah clumsily did as well, having done 6 less than the headmaster at the end due to the increase in pace. Peter stepped back from the rack and stood on his one real leg, lifting the prosthetic one up into the air before him. He stared at himself in the mirror as he balanced and did single-leg squats, keeping the other hoisted above. Judah started to do squats of his own, bending his back far too over with each one. Peter's eye twitched, and without even stumbling the slightest, popped off his prosthetic leg and swatted Judah on the back with it. "Master Judah, please try to pretend it is not your first time doing these exercises." He straightened out his back and he sighed. "Sorry, headmaster," he said, pausing. "It's just I prefer to use my mind. I don't think the problems I will need to solve will need to be solved by brute strength." More lightly this time, Peter swatted the student again. "The two are not mutually exclusive. Rather, a strong mind helps build a strong body, and a strong body paves the way to a strong mind. And you never know what problems you may need to solve." Peter looked solemn. He seemed no longer angry as he went back to doing his single-leg squats. Judah continued doing them, and waited for his mentor to speak. "I want what is best for you, Judah," he said. "When students turn 18, they leave this school, and there is no chance after that for me to do anything to help them. When you go, I want you to have no regrets about your time here. I want you to feel I have successfully molded you into a strong Christian man. I want both of us to feel that way." Judah nodded. "I understand, headmaster. I will try to be better." Peter smiled warmly. It was a rare occurrence for the older man. In these moments, the veneer of the grizzled veteran headmaster faded, and an illusion appeared in which he could be someone's gentle and caring grandfather. The two continued to exercise throughout the first period together. In the 1A classroom, the middle-aged Mr. Jim stood at the front of the class. It was a simplistic classroom, with old wooden desks and a single chalkboard sitting in front of a large wooden teacher's desk. He had just gotten done leading the class in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by prayer. The classroom was set up in such a way that all the boys sat in the front 2 rows. There was a small space in between the boys and the next rows, which were all girls. The architects of Canaveral Academy did not subscribe to the idea that boys and girls should be separated entirely. They thought they should merely remove the possible temptation for the teenagers to look lustfully at one another, or so the mission document said. Instead, the room was meaningfully configured so that the girls, thought to be more studious and less in need of a closer eye, were in the back. The boys, in order to be quickly scolded for staring at a female classmate and keep them from being rowdy, were placed in the front, close to the teacher. Mr. Jim shook his head as he looked at this configuration. He strongly disapproved of it, though he had adopted his own way of adjusting to the setup. He scrawled out on the board the words, "The Declaration of Independence." Then he proceeded to walk towards the divide between the two and looked directly in the faces of the girls as he strolled back and forth and talked. "So, Thomas Jefferson's magnum opus, as considered by many, the Declaration of Independence. Our announcement to the tyrannical government of Great Britain. In the earliest parts of it, the document contains the following words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Can anyone tell me the importance of that choice of words?" A handful of boys in the front raised their hands. Mr. Jim barely narrowed his eyes in their direction before making a slight frown. The girls were all apprehensive to raise their hands. But after a bit of time, Rebecca finally did. The teacher's face switched to a polite smile and said, "Yes, Miss Rebecca. I think it's important because he's saying everyone should have equal rights, and no one should be a king, more important than the others." He made a clicking sound with his tongue. "Close, Miss Rebecca, but think about it. Thomas Jefferson cared not about whether the king continued to rule over those in Britain. There must have been another reason he is saying what he is saying." Some of the boys lowered their hands. No one in the back of the class raised theirs. After a while, a devilish smirk came across his face as he pointed towards Rachel. "Rachel, what about you? What do you think?" he asked. Rachel sank a bit into her chair. She seemed almost to cower as he looked at her. She shuddered and seemed to not want to answer, but his eyes just continued to bore into her menacingly. After some time of this, Mary politely but quickly shot her hand into the air. "I think the answer you are looking for is to say that Thomas Jefferson was to say all men are created, not simply brought into existence. You think he was saying the Christian God brought humanity into existence, and in the same way, Thomas Jefferson tied the creation of America to that God's will." Mr. Jim kept a slight smirk, but nodded. "You are basically right, Miss Mary, though I wonder what makes you say it's the answer I'm looking for, rather than just saying it's the answer." She looked contemplative for a moment. "It's just, sir, I've been reading through his other works, as you recommended, and he says this: 'The day will come when the mystical generation of Jesus, by the Supreme Being as his Father in the womb of a virgin, will be classed with the fable of the generation of Minerva in the brain of Jupiter.' I don't quite understand how to reconcile that with a Thomas Jefferson who thought a Christian God was divinely intervening in the country's creation." Mr. Jim seemed to look perplexed for a moment. He pulled a paper outline from his back pocket. From the handwriting alone, it was clearly marked up by the headmaster. Small edits and details added to fit the agenda that the school intended to push. After perusing it, the teacher found something he liked. "Ah, yes, the great overachiever, Miss Mary," he said. And then he cleared his throat. "Students, Miss Mary has uncovered a hint of one of the great heresies of American history. This heresy pushed that the pledge I just had you say was false, that America is not a nation under a Christian God, and rather that the founders were deists, those who believed in a distant, uncaring, and uninvolved higher power, rather than the Christian God." He paused, walking back to his desk to take a sip of his tea mug that sat there, but he almost immediately returned to the divide. He slapped a boy along the head as he attempted to crane his neck to follow the teacher, with his eyes as he approached the girls. "This is the work of communists, traitors and non-believers who seek to destroy this country by making us turn against it and its values. It's important to keep such falsehoods from spreading. Wouldn't you agree, Rachel?" With this, he turned and put both of his hands on her desk and leaned forward into her personal space. Mary attempted to raise her hand and continue the discussion, but he ignored her. Instead, he stared directly into Rachel's eyes and grinned, all the while she slightly trembled. Eventually, after a painful period of silence, she spoke. "Sir, may I please use the lavatory?" He let out a brief chuckle. Mary jumped out from her desk and stood up with great urgency. He looked at her with a glint in his eye. "No need, Miss Mary. You stay here and mind the bell. Please ring it if any of your classmates act up or get out of their seat. I can escort Miss Rachel." Rachel's lip quivered a bit. She looked towards Mary for help. After sighing begrudgingly, she just nodded at her fellow classmate, having no other option but to allow this to happen. Mr. Jim grabbed Rachel by the arm and pulled her up and towards the door. The other girls looked on in fear, and the boys looked on in agitation, some weighing in their mind whether or not to act out. However, they had all gotten a close look at Francis in the cage, and knew that the headmaster was not the type of man to de-escalate if he thought he failed to send a message. The two stepped out of the door and down the hallway towards the lavatory. When he was sure they were out of earshot, a boy named Paul shook his head and groaned. "What a creep," he said. "Mary, let's just get out of here. Let us leave. Don't ring the bell. We can't keep putting up with this abuse." Mary rolled her eyes. "And what? And leave Rachel behind to become the next center of abuse? That's assuming we even get out of here. Mr. John is still on patrol for the next hour. You really think you're going to get past him?" Rebecca sighed. "We're doing everything you said, Mary, and it's only getting worse. Jim is brazen, and Jamie is out of control. I think I'd rather take my chances with old Johnny at this point." Mary grabbed the string of the bell and pulled it taut, sensing the rebellion. She let them know she would, at a moment's notice, be able to ring it. This caused the others to look on apprehensively. "In the 10 years at Canaveral Academy, only 2 students have ever escaped. But there have been over 100 attempts. What makes you think you're going to beat the odds without having some kind of fully coordinated effort? And when you do, what will the majority of us who don't do? What do you think will be put through?" She paused. Her fellow students stared at the string like it was a gun she pointed at all of their heads. "No, we just need to survive, get some of us to graduation, and then we will come back and expose this institution for what it is." Paul slammed his fist. "So many of us before have promised to do that, but no one ever does. Let's face it, we're all here because we're self-serving jerks only out for ourselves. Let's put that aside for one big act of solidarity and just break for it now." Some murmured in agreement. Mary did not relent, just holding the string tightly in her hand. "Speak for yourself," she said. "You know I'm not here for that reason. My situation is different, and when I leave, I will continue to be different." Her words brought the room to complete silence. No one dared to argue with Mary when she invoked her reason for admission to the academy. After some time, there was a shout heard in the hallway, followed by clomping footsteps towards the classroom. Mr. Jim, bleeding, stormed into the classroom. His eyes looked crazed as he pointed at Mary. "Rachel stabbed me in the hand with her pencil. Ring the bell." Mary's eyes widened and she did as he said. With his other hand, he pulled out a radio from his back pocket and turned it on. The bell system throughout the campus began ringing, alerting all to attention. "Rachel has fled from the history classroom and is attempting escape," Mr. Jim barked into the radio to alert the others who had tuned in. "What? The other students are arriving now," Headmaster Peter said. "You mind the new arrivals. She's mine," Miss Jamie said. "You don't do anything to that brat until I can pay her back," Mr. Jim responded, before grabbing his hand. "Gah, I need medical pronto, and someone help me assemble my class." "En route," Mr. Phillips said. The students got into two single-file lines by gender, as Mr. Phillips showed up to escort them back to the assembly area. Mr. Jim made a makeshift bandage from his own clothing, but could not seem to stop the bleeding. Mary noticed this, seeming to carefully observe him as she was led out of the building. The class was let out. Staff and others seemed to scurry about, getting on bicycles as they fanned out and communicated to find the missing child. In the distance, they could see the headmaster guiding a bus into the campus alongside another faculty member, and Sister Teresa. Mr. Phillip gasped upon getting to the assembly area. "What is wrong with you people?" The frenzied staff looked at him in confusion, and he saw Headmaster Peter, who could hear him, give him a nasty glance as a warning to stop raising a stir when the new students emerge. He grabbed one of the members of the staff, a nurse called Miss Andrea, and pointed to the empty cage. Miss Andrea pulled up her radio and whispered, "Francis has been let out of the cage. I repeat, Francis has been let out of the cage. Be aware, I am headed to treat Mr. Jim." Mary's eyes widened. She looked towards the empty cage, and then she looked over towards the headmaster. She scanned around, and Judah was nowhere in sight. She broke off in a panic towards the exercise facility. Miss Andrea, he's going for Judah," she cried. She bolted off in that direction. Miss Andrea attempted to grab her, but she was too slow. She turned to Mr. Phillip. "Go get her! Then there will be no one here to watch the students." Hearing this, one of the younger boys broke off into a sprint towards the road that led to the gate that the bus had come through. A girl saw the same opening that she did and started to move, but Rebecca grabbed her by the arm, gesturing towards something in the distance. As the boy sprinted past the headmaster, he looked confused that Peter gave no chase. Instead, he almost seemed to gesture at him for the students on the bus to watch. Suddenly, the boy felt something pierce him in the neck. Within moments, he stumbled to the ground. As he struggled to get up, all he was able to do was raise his head to see a hunchbacked old man walking towards him with a tranquilizer gun in hand. "Old Johnny still got it." He grabbed the boy by the collar and dragged him back towards the assembly. Miss Andrea gritted her teeth after seeing no action from Mr. Phillip and ran after Mary herself. The campus was chaos for a while, as the headmaster and other faculty attempted to bring in the new students while simultaneously quelling the mass desertion that was occurring. After some time, close to an hour, voices started to come through the radios. "I caught the brat at the north fence, bringing her to the cage," Miss Jamie said. "Master Judah and Miss Mary are under my supervision in the cafeteria," Miss Andrea said. "Caught the bloodied boy limping alongside the road. Couldn't even outrun old Johnny." Headmaster Peter smiled with delight as all this information came in at once. He held out the radio to the students, old and new, to show them the futility of any future escape attempts. Even under the least ideal circumstances, the attempted escapees hardly got anywhere. Sister Teresa shook her head at him, disapprovingly. She saw one of the boys sweating in the hot summer sun. and handed him a small bottle of water from the bus. Peter scowled, but did not intervene. "Mr. Jim, please report to the assembly area for treatment," Peter said. There was no response on the other end. "Mr. Jim, please respond and confirm you are en route to the assembly area." Again, there was no answer. Mary, Judah, and Miss Andrea arrived at the assembly area. Miss Jamie dragged Rachel by her hair. The girl was bruised, as Miss Jamie clearly wasted no time in giving her an unauthorized punishment. In any other circumstance, that would be Peter's top priority. But he said nothing, as Rachel was thrown into the cage. He just stared at the radio. Wordlessly, he ran off towards the history classroom. He pushed in every door in a frantic rush. He got down the hallway and opened the door and stood in silence at what he saw. Mr. Jim was laying dead on the classroom floor, full of additional stab wounds. The bell string had been cut and his radio smashed. Blood pooled from his body, but written in big letters on the chalkboard, in the same crimson colors, were the words lust and abuse. Scattered across the bloody desk were Polaroid photos. They showed various images of Mr. Jim and Rachel in an isolated location. He had his hands on her inappropriately. The photos were clearly taken on several different days, seeming to show an ever-increasing escalation in his misconduct. The headmaster stared in shock as he gripped his fist tightly. Thank you so much for listening to this chapter of Canaveral Academy for Challenged Youth. If you enjoyed, please rate the podcast, give it a like on YouTube, or share with someone else who you think might also enjoy. You can stay up to date with Canaveral Academy for Challenged Youth by following us on social media. That will be D Squared Stories on just about any of the major platforms. Thanks again for listening, and I hope to have you listen again next week.